Throughout the annals of human belief, there exists a figure whose very name inspires fear and unease: Satan. Feared as the ultimate adversary to righteousness, he has become synonymous with evil itself. But who or what is Satan? In this video, we delve deep into the myths, texts, and artistic depictions that have shaped our understanding of this enigmatic and malevolent being. From the sinister whispers of Scripture to the dark brilliance of Dante's Divine Comedy and Milton's Paradise Lost, Satan's portrayal is as multifaceted as it is terrifying. We'll explore his many names, the symbols he embodies, and the shifting ways he has been envisioned through the ages. While his essence is clear, a force of corruption and deceit, the lack of a singular description leaves room for endless interpretations. For centuries, artists and theologians alike have reimagined Satan, transforming him into a figure of both horror and fascination. The Bible itself offers surprisingly little in terms of a concrete description of Satan's appearance. Instead, the devil's physical form is a canvas upon which centuries of fear and imagination have painted. Early Christian texts and artwork avoided direct depictions, instead focusing on his actions and influence. However, by the 9th century, Christian artists began crafting a visual identity for Satan. This new image, horned, hooved, and hideously hairy, became the standard, despite having no scriptural foundation. The addition of the pitchfork further cemented his role as a tormentor of souls, though this weapon, too, lacks biblical mention. Nakedness, a recurring theme in earlier depictions, symbolized his ultimate shame and disgrace. In more modern interpretations, Satan has taken on a more demonic yet human-like form, often depicted as a winged creature with red eyes, pale skin, and the ominous number of the beast. These portrayals not only heighten his horror, but also reflect humanity's evolving understanding of fear and evil. Central to Satan's mythos is his fall from grace, an event that marks his transformation from the angel Lucifer into the devil. The Book of Revelation offers the most vivid account of this transformation. Once a being of unparalleled beauty and excellence, Lucifer was cherished by God above all other creations. Yet his pride and ambition sowed the seeds of his downfall. Convinced of his superiority, Lucifer sought to rise above God himself, demanding that all creation bow to his will. This act of defiance was not solitary. Many angels, captivated by Lucifer's splendor, sided with him in his rebellion. Revelation 12:7 recounts the celestial war that followed. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. This passage is often interpreted as a depiction of the battle between Lucifer and the archangel Michael, a conflict that split the heavens. Lucifer's choice to take on the form of a dragon, a creature synonymous with destruction and terror, underscores his desperation and thirst for power. Yet, even in this formidable guise, he could not overcome Michael's forces. The text continues, "But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. Defeated and cast out, Lucifer fell to earth, his name and identity forever changed." The transition from Lucifer to Satan is not merely a tale of punishment, it is a profound commentary on pride, rebellion, and consequence. As Lucifer, he represents the pinnacle of creation, a being who reflects God's glory. As Satan, he becomes the antithesis of this perfection, embodying corruption and despair. His fall is a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of hubris and the destructive power of unchecked ambition. Lucifer was the angel who betrayed God, and once he is cast out and no longer an angel, he adopts the new name Satan and becomes something wicked and evil. But there are those that dispute this, believing that Lucifer was simply a term used by the prophet Isaiah in Isaiah 14.12, where he says, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations?" In this, some scholars believe that the use of Lucifer here isn't a name per se, but instead a description, meaning lightbringer in Latin. Or that Isaiah is referring to Satan as Lucifer because he once was the brightest angel, or he who shunned the brightest, and that it is such a shame that he turned out the way he did. In any case, Lucifer has since become synonymous with Satan, the two terms being interchangeable in most modern cases to describe the devil. This is just two of the names that the devil has, but he is also known as Beelzebub, the Antichrist, and Moloch. In the Greek Old Testament, Satan is referred to as Diablos, but it is also thought that Diablos is in reference to wicked people or spirits. Diablos was also thought to mean slanderer, an act demonstrated by Satan as he slanders the word and name of God. In early Germanic, the term Diablos was used, and it was also an equivalent of the term diabolical. Abaddon is also another term frequently equipped with Satan, Abaddon being a place of destruction in the Old Testament, as well as an angel of death in some interpretations and various lore. In the classification by Peter Binsfield, both Lucifer and Satan appear to be two separate entities, in that Lucifer maintains his role as the demon of pride, and Satan takes on the role as the demon of wrath. This actually fits in with the fall of the angels after having been cast out of heaven, and that it was Lucifer's pride that led him to being expelled in the first place, which saw him hurtling towards earth, where he seems to have become Satan. Satan, as mentioned, is identified as the demon of wrath in Peter Binsfield's classification, and this is most fitting given that he becomes vengeful against God and equally vengeful against mankind, those whom he views as his enemies. But going back to the Bible, we understand that Satan becomes the embodiment of all things evil. Satan exists through many different forms to tempt man off the righteous path, an act he does not only because he hates mankind, for they are God's favored creation, but also to get back at God for having defeated him. It leads us to the idea believed by many that Satan takes the form of the serpent in Genesis, the very same serpent that tempted Adam and Eve into eating the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden. It certainly would give the serpent a motive for being so deceitful, because as Satan, he wants nothing more than to bring pain upon God. By tricking his own creations against him, he uses mankind to get back at God and to rob him of having loyal and trustworthy beings in his garden. In this, Satan gets the upper hand over God, a small victory perhaps, but one he relishes in because he has ruined something that God loves. There's also the line from Revelations as mentioned earlier that refers to Satan as that ancient serpent, where it said the great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. Here we see Satan identified as a serpent, which could be in reference to both his dragon form and his snake form. He's also noted as leading the whole world astray, something the snake in the Garden of Eden essentially takes responsibility for, in that he deceived the first man and woman, and thus the rest of humanity bore the consequences of. In Hebrew, the term Satan was thought to be a noun that meant accuser or adversary. A pretty fitting term if you think about how Satan operates in some Jewish beliefs. While Satan himself is not necessarily considered to be the big bad evil in the Torah or in the Talmud, He does appear at the command of God to deliver his will, whereby he serves as an obstacle for the evil prophet Balaam, who is hired to curse the Jews. Through this, he could very well be considered an adversary, not necessarily to God, but an adversary in general. We also see Satan appear in the book of Job, whereby Job is cursed by God after a wager with Satan to see if Job would still worship God if he was met with misfortune. In fact, God actually grants Satan the freedom to do his worst against Job, and thus Satan comes to serve as something of an agent of God in that he does what God tells him, so long as he gets to hurt humans in some capacity. This might link to him being the accuser, in that it is he who brings about punishment to man, for he serves God in some loose manner to facilitate his vengeance. It could also be that God has complete control over Satan, and that he uses the evil demon to bring upon wrath on those who deserve it. We often see the non-capitalized form of Satan appear in the Jewish texts, and it is understood that this refers not to the Satan but instead any man or being that provides an obstacle, which makes sense given that the term Satan also derives from a verb meaning to obstruct or to oppose. Meanwhile, we also see the usage of "Hey Satan," and in this instance, it is believed that Satan is being discussed. For the most part, though, Satan appears to have a far larger role in Christian theology than in Judaism, and so allow us to return to the Bible, where we look at the very first instance where Satan is mentioned. Satan acts in the Bible exactly the way in which you would expect him to. While he never seems to physically engage man, he does appear to tempt him in a variety of different ways. We see this in Chronicles 21, where King David is tempted by Satan into conducting a census on the Israeli people, the army specifically. It might not seem like that big of a sin, but it is believed that by counting his fighting men, David did not trust God would see his victory, and that David chose to confide in numbers and strategy instead of pretty much taking God's word for it. It might also be because David demonstrated pride and greed in that he began to see the men as his own, and that they were his to count up and not God's. Furthermore, you might also say that because David accepted an order from Satan to count his men, God felt betrayed, and so through the prophet Gad, he gave David 3 choices of his punishment. These include either a 3-year famine, 3 months of being defeated in battle, or 3 days of plague, with an angel of God allowed to descend upon his lands and butcher and destroy any part of it. David accepts the latter, and thousands of people die from the plague, and an angel gets to run amok of the place, slaying the people and destroying their buildings. While some of you may say that David's punishment is severely disproportionate to his sin, it goes to show believers the detriment of even listening to Satan's words. David had by no means the idea to count his people until Satan gave him the idea, and by accepting Satan's idea and running with it, David is choosing Satan over God. The Bible makes it pretty clear here that negotiating, entertaining, or even listening to Satan's words are a big no, and that he who does risks getting a pretty considerable punishment. Satan in the Bible will go to any lengths to bring man down and to shame him before God. As we've seen thus far, we see him trick Adam and Eve, we see him coax David into doing something he knows God will dislike, and in Zechariah 3, we see him become the fashion police as he mocks the high priest Joshua for presenting before God in dirty clothes. While Satan isn't given a voice here, we understand that he was present along with another angel by God's side, and that when Joshua appeared to them, Satan took issue with how he was dressed. We know this because the angel seeks to remedy the situation straight away, saying, "Take off his filthy clothes." Then he said to Joshua, "See, I have taken away your sin, and I will put fine garments on you. It seems like a bizarre thing for Satan to get worked up over. This is because Satan probably couldn't find anything wrong about Joshua, and the best he could do to turn God against him was to target his clothes and imply that Joshua was neglectful and disrespectful to appear before him as he did. But the angel, whether this be an independent angel or an angel acting through God, doesn't see this as a big deal and destroys Satan's argument. He gives Joshua new clothes, thus leaving Satan without a leg to stand on. In this we see that Satan does what he can to get God to punish mankind, even if they don't necessarily deserve it. He hates mankind so much that he will clutch at straws if he has to, in order to get man to feel God's wrath in the way that he once did. The enmity for man is palpable. He would do anything to hurt man, whether this be through deceptions, temptations, or outright lies. But we seldom see Satan actually physically get involved with mankind, in that for all his hatred he never tries to fight us one-on-one. He enjoys leading us down a path of destruction and seems to be all the more happy to allow us to destroy ourselves, possibly because he knows that if we turn against God by our own volition, we would hurt God more than, say, him swooping down and attacking us. But we do get to see the power and mercilessness of Satan in the book of Job, where we see him hurt Job directly and where we do get to see a glimpse of his awful power. For those of you who are not familiar with the book of Job, I advise you to check out my video on it in the Biblical Stories Explained series. Essentially, we are told that Job was a righteous man who did everything by the book. He had a farm where he raised crops, had a great family, and earned a decent amount of money. Job was living the dream, and he thanked God for his blessings every day. God turned to Satan and proceeded to, well, kind of brag about how great Job is. He tells Satan that Job is an upright man who embraces him and shuns evil. Satan scoffs at this. He says, "Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." So God obliges Satan and tells him to pretty much do his worst against Job, but that he is not allowed to harm Job as a person. We then see Job's life absolutely ruined in the space of a day. We see his cattle stolen, his servants put to death by raiders, his children crushed under a building, and his crops destroyed by a fire that fell from the sky. Job is, of course, heartbroken, but he still thanks God and remains loyal. God then tells Satan that his notions of Job were wrong, and that even though he had taken everything away from Job, Job did not turn against him. So Satan ups the ante and tells him, skin for skin, a man will give all he has for his own life, but now stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. God again tells Satan to do his worst. We finally see Satan in action. Instead of resorting to his deceptions and his temptations and lies, he actually descends upon Job and inflicts physical harm upon him by casting painful sores upon his body. It only shows us how evil Satan is, but also that he isn't just all bark with no bite. Job is put into intense agony as a result of these sores, and so it certainly is a stark reminder that Satan is bad news. It shows us that whilst he is a being that is capable of bringing terrible calamities, and that whilst he should not be feared, he is an entity worthy of being cautious of. Although many believe that the only reason Satan strikes here is because God allows him to, in normal circumstances Satan would not be permitted to physically strike, which is why we don't see him do it often. For those wondering, Job goes on a roller coaster of discovery as he questions God and his own faith, but for the most part he still remains loyal. if not utterly skeptical. He is rewarded in the end with his life back, but only after much mental and physical suffering, a sad tale for a man who really did nothing wrong. Satan also features quite prominently in the Gospels by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and, as always, takes on the role of a deceiver and a tempter, but in some very unique ways. Firstly, there's the account in Matthew 4 where Jesus is led up into the wilderness and fasts for 40 days and 40 nights. Whilst here, Satan comes to Jesus and reminds him that if he is the Son of God, then he needn't starve, for he can turn the stones around him into loaves of bread. But Jesus resists him, telling him, "One does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Here Jesus sets an example to believers in how best to deal with Satan, and that is to simply dismiss him. Jesus reaffirms his affinity with God, and Satan is at a loss. But far be it from Satan to give up so easily. He takes Jesus to the holy city and to the pinnacle of the temple and tells him to jump. For if he jumps, God will surely save him, for he is the Son of God. Here we see Satan's frustration, for he had started his temptation of Jesus with just getting him to eat bread, but now he's actively trying to kill him by getting him to jump. But Jesus recognizes this and tells him, "Again, it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Jesus' dismissal of Satan is made to look effortless, for he of all people cannot be tempted by evil as the Son of God. Here Jesus serves as an inspiration to believers and likely encourages them to aspire to be the same. Finally, we see Satan take Jesus to a very high mountain where he shows him the vast kingdoms of the world, and he tells Jesus that he will give him all of it and more if he bows down now and worships him instead. Here we see Satan still clinging on to this idea that he should be the one who is worshipped, that he is greater than God, and that he is the one at liberty to give kingdoms unto men, when in actuality he doesn't have any of this power at all. Satan evidently suffers from delusions of grandeur, and Jesus sees right through this. Jesus actually gets quite firm with Satan, telling him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only him." Here believers are given another model of behavior when facing Satan, and that is to be strong, be adamant, and not be afraid to tell him to leave you alone. Notice that when Jesus does this, Satan actually does back off, and no further attempt to goad him off the righteous path is made again. Yet another interesting account of Satan's behavior and his abilities is described in John 13, where Jesus is telling his disciples that one of them will indeed betray him. When Simon Peter asks him who he is speaking of, Jesus replies, "It is the one to whom I give this piece of bread. When I have dipped it in the dish," Jesus then dips the bread in the dish and hands it to Judas Iscariot, who after receiving the bread is actually infiltrated by Satan. John tells us, after he received the piece of bread, Satan entered into him. It's a pretty bold statement to make, for it almost vindicates Judas of being the traitor that would end up selling out Jesus to the Romans. While you might say Judas was weak in that he allowed Satan to take control over him, we never get to see this interaction. We don't know what Satan said, nor do we know how much power Satan used against Judas in getting him to ultimately betray Jesus. But going by how Satan doesn't seem to be able to do anything without the consent of his victims, it is likely that Satan promised Judas something that he couldn't refuse, or that he bullied Judas into allowing him to possess him. In any case, Judas falls victim to Satan's scheming, and this leads to the crucifixion of Jesus. In this, Satan scores yet another victory against God, and we see this back and forth between the two sides throughout the Bible, a regular battle between good and evil that sees the scales tipped back and forth. It again serves to remind us of how cunning Satan actually is, and that believers should be mindful of his tricks, for if he is unable to infiltrate your mind, he could very well infiltrate the mind of someone you love and trust and use them to hurt you for your faith. In any case, while Satan does get some victories here and there, those who are pure of mind and body are usually those that earn God's blessings. The moral of most of these interactions is don't trust the devil, don't listen to the devil, and maybe just don't even talk to him. Talk and delete that arsehole, for real. In almost all arguments over the Bible, it is generally agreed that regardless of what happens, God is going to defeat Satan, and this gives believers some hope and some encouragement to keep being righteous. As Paul the Apostle tells us in Romans 16:20, the God of peace will shortly crush Satan under your feet. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you. In the parables of Jesus, most notably the parable of the sower, we learn that those who fail to really understand the Gospels are those that have already been deceived or infiltrated by Satan. It's also understood from the parables, much like Paul tells us in Romans 16:20, that Satan will be destroyed and that those who follow him will perish on the day of judgment, and that they will be committed to an eternal fire. This is furthermore supported by Revelation 20:10, a section appropriately titled Satan's Doom, and we are told, "And the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet were. And they will be tormented day and night forever and ever." We've spoken about Satan having a minimal role in Judaism, in that many Jews do not believe in his existence as a supernatural being, but more so as an abstract idea. Many rabbis have interpreted the word of Satan, often the uncapitalized form, as referring to corporeal and human enemies, perhaps even disbelievers or those that refute God. Meanwhile, the Kabbalah presents Satan as sort of an emissary or agent of God, one who seeks to tempt humans into sinning so that he may serve as their judge in the heavenly court. Through this idea, Satan is employed by God to root out evil humans, sort of like an undercover cop who entraps his victims and exposes them. A similar belief exists in some Islamic interpretations of Iblis, the devil in the Quran, who was once a jinn made from smokeless fire. Man, on the other hand, was made from clay, and so when Allah requests his angels to bow before man, Iblis refuses. Iblis is cast out for his pride and disobedience of Allah, but one idea is that Iblis still serves Allah in that he tempts man into sin to prove to Allah that man really isn't all that great. Of course, this is just one idea, and we'll look at Iblis in a bit more detail later on. Meanwhile, in the Hebrew Bible, there exists a heavenly prosecutor known as Satan, and he is a member of the angelic hierarchy known as the sons of God, those that serve Yahweh. Satan is seen to prosecute the kingdom of Judah and also test the loyalty of Yahweh's followers in a similar way to Job by forcing them to suffer. Over time, this Satan figure gained more notoriety, and soon he was viewed as a malevolent being and one to be despised for his wickedness. The Book of Jubilees, an apocryphal Jewish work, sees this Satan character described as Mastema, and Mastema is seen to negotiate with Yahweh to let him keep some of the fallen angels that had turned against him. Yahweh agrees, and Mastema uses the fallen angels to tempt humans into sinning so as to determine whether they are righteous or not, or to punish them for their offenses. By the Middle Ages, Satan started to be taken a little less seriously, or at least mocked by certain writers and playwrights. Often he would appear in plays as a comedic character, one who tried to come across as evil but usually ended up embarrassing himself. While he would try to convey himself as masterfully evil, he would usually end up doing something stupid and inadvertently reveal himself to be masterfully foolish. His role in these plays usually saw him taken advantage of by the very people he sought to manipulate, and often or not would come across as more of a nuisance than a serious antagonist. But Satan, in reality during these times, was still an overarching menace, one who worked behind the scenes of society to corrupt and deceive. We see this in that witches were considered to be the consorts of demons, and that they could perform sexual acts with demons and sometimes Satan himself in exchange for magical powers. These consultations with Satan would otherwise include the summoning of him to seek counsel, the sacrifice of unbaptized babies to him, or, as Ephraim mentioned, a straight-up booty call. During this time, women were condemned and often executed, for the church soon began to believe that witchcraft was an activity organized by Satan himself. In the past, the power of Satan was undeniable for Christians worldwide, and many communities today still hold the father of evils in the same chilling regard. Many believers today choose to guard against Satan by surrounding themselves in their faith, or by surrounding themselves in merry company of family and friends. For it is believed that Satan hates happiness and so will often keep away, seeking to choose easier, more vulnerable targets for his work. In Arabic, meanwhile, we have the word shaitan, which does sound similar to Satan. The shaitan, however, are evil spirits in Islam, sometimes considered as demons or devils, that work to do exactly that which Satan does, and that is to lure people into corruption. Often this is thought to be done by whispering in the victim's ear, encouraging them to sin. Shaitan, or the singular shaitan, is sometimes referred to as Satan himself, but the more common name for Satan in Islam is Iblis. Where Satan serves as something of the root of all evil, in Islam, Iblis is not necessarily the cause of evil, but more so a tempter that gets man to initiate the evil by his own hand. We understand from many surahs in the Quran that Allah asks all the angels to bow before Adam, whom Allah viewed as a magnificent creation. The angels all obeyed, but Iblis, who wasn't exactly a true angel given that he was created from fire and considered sometimes to be a spirit known as a jinn, or the very first jinn, claimed he was superior to Adam and that he should not have to prostrate before him like the others. Allah then expels Iblis for showing so much pride and condemns him to Jahannam, or hell if you will. From then on, Iblis was considered to be an ungrateful and spiteful creature, one who hated man for who he blamed for losing his place. In an effort to demonstrate his hatred towards men and his desire to get them to suffer the same fate as him, he attempts to lead humanity astray. Allah allows him to do this, of course, for by doing so, Allah is able to see who is truly righteous and who truly deserves a place in paradise. Some Muslims also believe that Satan, or Iblis, is able to create insecurities in the mind as well as stimulate desires, which can lead us to sin. It's thought that when a believer successfully resists Satan, he returns again with new temptations later on, and that this becomes a never-ending battle, and thus a true testament to one's character, depending on how much he resists. If a believer feels that they are overwhelmed by Satan's temptations, they are advised to seek refuge with Allah, and that He will help them through this difficult period. Finally, there is of course Satanism. In theistic Satanism, which you may have heard of as devil worship, believers here worship Satan as a deity, and they entreat to Satan the same way one may entreat to God. Whilst I myself am not so well versed in theistic Satanism, unfortunately, it is known that there are many different independent groups and cabals, all with varying degrees of worship and ideas. Perhaps something for us to dive into in another video. Atheistic Satanism, meanwhile, is a little different. Many might know of the Satanic Temple or the Levian Satanists, two groups that identify with the practice of Satanism. What makes them different from theistic Satanists, though, is that they do not believe Satan exists, not at least in the biblical sense, but more like a rational, neutral figure who symbolizes liberty and individual achievement and empowerment. They believe in the prideful, carnal nature of Satan as a symbol of a very human characteristic and something that should be promoted. Satan is not a being here, but more so a concept, a belief in something powerful that represents man's ability to achieve his potential. Levian Satanists, meanwhile, focus more on the name of Satan, that very adversary that we spoke about in the beginning of the video. It is this adversarial nature that they choose to adopt when it comes to religion, and that they seek to question spiritual belief systems that they believe are detrimental to the enjoyment of life. Members of these groups also hold science as a key virtue to development, and that religion should not infringe on the advancement of the human race. We also see Satan depicted in some interesting ways in classical literature, such as in Dante's Inferno, where he is shown to be a giant demon, one who appears in the ninth circle of hell to be frozen in place. Here he is said to have 3 faces and a pair of black wings. According to Dante, in each of his mouths, Satan chews on Marcus Junius Brutus, Gaius Cassius, and Judas Iscariot, the former who betrayed Julius Caesar and the latter who betrayed Jesus. Here Dante attributes Julius Caesar and Jesus Christ as being 2 of the greatest humans in history, given that Caesar formed the new order of government while Jesus formed the new order of religion. Dante also tells us of the freezing cold wind that comes about as Satan beats his wings. Ice-cold wind that keeps him and other demons frozen in place within the ninth circle. Meanwhile, in the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer, we see an almost comical interpretation of Satan that highlights the hypocrisy of some holy men, whereby a friar lands in hell only to be told that there are millions of friars here too. When he doesn't immediately find the rest of his holy brethren, Satan appears and reveals to him that the others all live inside his anus. In the poem Paradise Lost, however, Satan appears to be the tragic protagonist, one who suffered defeat because of his own pride. He is also seen to be here as a tragic character, one who holds some merit in that he dares to oppose the rule laid down by God, something that is echoed as being heroic in this text. It just goes to show how much of a complex character Satan is, in that there are those who of course view him as detestable and wicked, but also those who find good qualities in him, such as Satanists or the poet John Milton. Satan has served the world in a variety of different ways, not only as an inspiration for some of the most famous literary pieces, but also in a cautionary manner, reminding believers of the faith to turn away from his temptations and to stay on the righteous path. He is also a reminder of the balance of good and evil, in that without one, the other cannot exist. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to the channel for more fascinating content. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support means the world to us. Stay tuned for more exciting videos.